Everyone has something to hide.
We're gonna need additional units up here.
But when you're a killer, deception runs deep.
I wanted to escape all this pain.
Every look, every move, every word has hidden meaning.
I still love her.
I'm a criminal psychologist, and I talk to killers.
Do you feel you deserve to die?
I ask the questions that get inside the mind of a murderer.
My mother and my father have just been killed. I just walked in the door. They are dead.
That was Jennifer Wendorf calling 911 on November 26, 1996. She's reporting that her parents, Richard and Ruth, are dead.
The Wendorfs were your typical family. The dad is a manager of a container company in Orlando. The mom volunteers at the girls' school. They live in a nice house, 5 acres.
Rod Ferrell was just 16 years old when he brutally killed the Wendorfs.
I just brought the crowbar down with both hands. And I didn't stop. His face wasn't even recognizable. At which point, I flipped the crowbar around and tried to impale him, because I wanted him to die.
It boggles the mind how anyone could do such a thing. And I want to find out why. Now I'm on my way to the Tomoka Correctional Facility in Daytona Beach, Florida, to meet Rod Ferrell face to face. It's very unusual to commit a crime like this at such a young age. This will be a rare opportunity to get a glimpse inside the mind of someone who has killed as a child. He murdered 2 people who were essentially strangers to him in such a vicious fashion. It really seemed like he got off on it. The murder sent shockwaves through their small Florida town. And what made it all the more chilling is that Rod Ferrell claimed he was a vampire who drank blood. Rod Ferrell has now been in prison for 20 years. I've done my research on him, and I know he's smart. I walk in with a sense of who I think I'm going to meet, but I need to make sure I control the interview because these guys have a lot of time to think about what they want to say, to get their agenda through. So if I'm not on my game, we don't get what we need. Rod doesn't look as terrifying as I expected. But I do know that the most evil killers can hide behind an ordinary facade.
Hi, Mr. Ferrell. How are you? Nice to meet you.
This is my first and probably only interview with somebody who calls himself a vampire. So I'm just going to ask him straight out about that.
What attracted you to vampirism? What was the allure for you there?
I was 15. It was 1995. At that time, I think Anne Rice's Interview with the Vampire came out. It was very seductive, the whole lifestyle. A lot of the kids back at that time were infatuated with vampires.
Did you take this seriously at all?
I started to believe at that time that if you found a way to awaken that life inside your blood, then you could help awaken the next person. Almost like infectious, only with knowledge and understanding, maybe leading on to like a physical manifestation of power.
The way Rod speaks is fascinating. He didn't really answer my question. What he's saying doesn't make sense, but it sounds mysterious and seductive. He's got a rare quality in a killer, charm, and I have a feeling he's going to use it to try to disarm me. Rod Ferrell was the only son born to Sandra Gibson, a single teenage mom, and he grew up being shuffled around low-rent homes in Florida and Kentucky.
He's always loved music and drawing, but he was kind of a loner growing up.
Did you feel different from other children at that point?
I always felt that there was a difference between myself and the kids that were my age, in that it seemed to me that I could see things more clearly in more of an adult way. I suppose I was a little more intelligent than most of the people around me.
It sounds like Rod was grandiose from a young age. He thought he was better and smarter than other people. And this is a red flag for me because having that occur so early on could be a sign of a personality disorder like narcissism or even psychopathy. Sandra says he was a quiet but seemingly normal child until his teens.
I began to notice a change when he was 15 years old. Into the dark arts is what he called it. He got into witchcraft, like the way his clothing changed, the jewelry and the clothes and the hair and the look, and all that stuff too.
Frank Stanfield was a reporter for the Orlando Sentinel who followed Rod's case and knows it intimately.
Rod would hang around in cemeteries and mausoleums in the middle of the night, all night long. Rod claimed that he was a 500-year-old immortal named Vasago.
Did you recognize the difference between reality and fantasy?
At that point, I still did recognize the difference between reality and fantasy. I believed it was a spiritual path. That's what a lot of the subculture at that time believed, like a personal awakening and a path that you take for better understanding of your life.
Rod makes it sound like he was searching for meaning and spirituality.
Thee that didn't create the earth and the heavens.
And I think it's likely he chose vampirism because it's rebellious and subversive. He tells me how he engaged in blood-drinking rituals with other would-be vampires.
Explain to me the feeling of drinking blood from another.
Bloodletting's just like sex. Just like some people are dominant and some people are submissive in sex. Some people like to give blood, other people like to take it.
Is there a rush associated with drinking blood?
There was a rush of sorts associated because whenever I would drink the blood of another directly like from their vein and it was still hot, it was almost like a sexual release.
For a teenage Rod, blood drinking and sexual activity became a toxic mix.
They would go over to Orlando, and there was clubs over there, and they actually let the young kids into the club. There was a lot of orgies, stuff like that was going on. He would be fine when he left, and he would come back, and he would just be wild. I don't know what he was using exactly at that time, but he was very destructive.
Do you feel that you would fall in that category of people who were thrill seekers?
I was absolutely a thrill seeker. I was a sensation seeker. I needed to feel. I wanted to feel. I didn't care what it was, how it was, what it took. I was willing to go the distance.
Like many criminals, Rod is a thrill seeker. And it's believed that thrill seekers have a baseline arousal that's so low that they're constantly looking for stimulation. Risk-taking releases adrenaline to the brain, giving him a rush of excitement, much like a drug. I think vampirism offers him that high. It's taboo, it's outside the norm, and he gets thrills from blood-sucking and orgies. As Rod became more degenerate, his mother lost what little control over him she still had.
His mother was a mess. She didn't put any real boundaries on him. Some of the neighbors said that they saw them holding hands and wearing black. So people thought they were like boyfriend, girlfriend.
Come here.
So she was very troubled and she had all kinds of issues.
Oh, well.
Do you feel like your mother enabled you?
She's been more like a best friend to me, as opposed to being a mother and son combination. She always tried to identify with my age and my culture more so than her own. Mm-hmm. The consequences and disciplines didn't really come to me as strictly as they might to other children.
I would say there might even have been some emotional incest going on here. It's as if they were friends, not really mother and son. She wasn't setting boundaries or even disciplining him. And a thrill seeker with a morbid fascination for blood needs a parent to intervene, not encourage him.
Do you think that that had anything to do with where you ended up in your teenage years?
Oh, I absolutely believe that the lack of consequence and discipline did lead to where I became during my teenage years. So that further encompassed that belief in the mysticism of the vampire, and it started further encouraging like my psychoses at that time.
Around this time, Rod becomes friends with Heather Wendorf, a 14-year-old outsider like himself with a taste for the dark side.
Badass.
Heather and Rod were two kindred spirits in a lot of ways. They were both creative types. They were both rebellious. They didn't want to fit in, so they fit in with each other.
At a party one night, Rod made Heather his vampire daughter by ritualistically drinking her blood.
When you do a blood ritual with them, you become their sire, they become your fledgling or their progeny. So you take them as like sons, daughters. I drank enough of her that night that she actually grew pale and faint.
Would you say you had a hold on Heather?
I ended up actually having a rather strong hold on Heather, mentally and emotionally.
When I first walked into the room, I was struck by how charming Rod is. I bet that worked really well with young girls like Heather. Their vulnerability would make them easily dependent on his seductive attention.
I do conjure thee, O thou spirit.
Rod continued to practice his vampire rituals on other young people, until one day his mother witnessed a sickening ceremony firsthand.
I walked into his bedroom and I saw him and two other friends, and they had been cutting each other and drinking blood from each other.
What are you doing?
She sees blood rippling and twining down my arm with this girl's, blood on our lips. She sees this guy in the corner quoting from a witch's Bible. She snapped.
Get out of my house!
My mother screamed and threw a fit and expelled the other two people from the house. She's threatening me. I ended up throwing my knife at her. It ended up sticking in the door frame next to her, and I told her if she ever threatened me again, I would bleed her dry.
Rod is so calm and matter-of-fact as he's saying this that it's easy to forget I'm sitting a few feet away from a killer who's telling me how he actually threatened his own mother's life.
I realized that things were getting worse with Rod, with his friends and with his attitude and everything else, and so I moved.
Sandra took Rod back to her hometown of Murray, Kentucky in hopes of getting him away from vampire culture. But right away, he sought out like-minded people.
Murray, Kentucky, it's a college town. There's a lot of teenagers and even older kids that were interested in the occult. There was a place outside of town called the Vampire Hotel where they would go and hang out and take drugs and do whatever they're going to do.
I asked him about this group of teens who began to look up to Rod as a leader of sorts.
I'm Jaden. Sago.
They were really nothing more than teenagers in backwater Kentucky towns.
They weren't anywhere near to your level of
No.
understanding.
I was amused beyond anything I could express about how these people were going about doing their thing. I did have a higher intellect than a lot of them. My maturity level was far surpassing theirs.
It seems that Rod's childhood grandiosity has turned into a full-fledged superiority complex. It doesn't surprise me that he begins using it to dominate the group of Kentucky teens who follow him.
And I started recruiting my own family, or cult as a lot of people have called it over the years.
Soon, Rod's hunger for power will drive him to an act that will have the worst consequences for himself and two innocent people.
Basically, I agreed to do your...
I'm talking to Rod Farrell, known as the Vampire Killer, trying to understand why he bludgeoned two innocent people to death for no apparent reason. I've learned that when he was 16, he decided to start his own vampire cult in rural Kentucky.
Listen, I know more about the black magic when everyone's in is in.
Here comes Rod out of nowhere, and he was recruiting people to be under him in the vampire world around Kentucky. That was a bit of, hey, look what I can do, you know, look at me and everything.
Rod had already sired one vampire daughter named Heather back in Florida.
Is there?
Then, in early 1996, he met Charity Kesey in high school. She was another restless teen looking for a place to fit in.
Charity was into the Gothic scene. She was kind of into the vampire stuff. So she had a lot in common with Rod.
You know, this is teenage stuff, but it's very strong. And they end up having a sexual relationship.
That thou comest quickly from all parts and places.
Along with Charity, Rod recruited 2 other members into his core group, Scott Anderson, an awkward loner, and Dana Cooper, a high school grad with a dead-end job.
Now, the people you choose to recruit, you have to have an eye for that. Maybe people who don't have a place where they belong or fit in or they feel different.
Did I specifically seek out those who had different social pariah issues?
Exactly, weakness.
I did have an eye for seeing where people had troubles or issues connecting or elevating their status socially, being popular. So what I wanted to do, my initial desire, was to empower them. I wanted to give them the strength to fight back.
And quite frankly, it gives you some power too, because then there are people who believe in you.
I incurred power through raising these people. By giving the power to my people, I in turn got power.
Rod seems to be saying he became some sort of a benevolent role model for other teens, but he was really establishing more of a dominant, submissive dynamic. He picked needy kids who wouldn't challenge him so he could boost his own ego. I would say he's a narcissist with delusions of grandeur.
At the height of your family, how many members were there?
Fully extended on all levels?
Sure.
Probably about 150 members.
Wow, okay.
But most of them didn't even know about each other. Certain ones were involved in drug trade, and others were involved in the actual mystic side, the occult side. Others were just there for the sex and the parties.
I don't believe Rod had 150 members, but I do believe he has some qualities of cult leaders like Charles Manson or Jim Jones. He's managed to manipulate a group of followers into dark, dangerous activities. This is rare even for an adult, and he's only 16. By this time, he had lost all respect for adult authority.
I would walk down the hall smoking cigarettes, maybe even smoking a joint. I didn't care. What could they do to me?
He was completely out of control, just out of control. He got into the really hard drugs. He was tripping on acid, he was using cocaine, he would stay out all night and not even say like where he was. He was sleeping all day and his grades started failing. He had always done really good with his grades, but his grades went down to Fs.
I started getting more rebellious. I started being more aggressive. I started believing that I could do whatever I wished.
Rod tells me he couldn't have cared less when he was finally kicked out of school.
What got me expelled was I was trying to console a girl that I was close with. She was crying very badly, very upset.
Come on, guys. What is this? Why aren't you guys in class, huh?
And the teacher started to reach down and touch me and tell me I couldn't be there, and I pulled my trench coat back.
What is this? Go to class.
Showed a knife I had.
Hey!
Touch me again, and I'll give you a smile ear to ear.
Not a lot of fear of consequence.
Consequences to me were some outlandish ideal that happened to other people, not me.
You were invincible.
It seemed like no matter what I did, I couldn't get caught. And I started truly believing towards like the midpoint of 1996 that I was invulnerable. I couldn't die, I couldn't be caught. How could you catch me?
I'm face to face with murderer Rod Farrell, and I'm tracking his descent into darkness.